Concerns about the financial consequences of the coronavirus crisis have largely washed out since the first few hectic weeks. That's a problem because authorities should be doing much more to prepare for what could be a destabilizing wave of losses. In the face of the pandemic, the US Federal Reserve has done an excellent job of keeping financial market functioning. It has pledged trillions of dollars to ensure that a broad range of institutions, including hedge funds, money market, mutual funds, and securities dealers, can meet their immediate obligations. This has helped consumers and companies to borrow the money they need to stay afloat. COVID-19 pandemic continues to rip through cities, towns and rural regions in US. The result of homicidal return to work to drive initiated by the Trump administration and dictated by Wall Street on the basis that nothing must prevent the extraction of surplus value. American economy is now characterized by looting and plunder, with the rise on Wall Street the equivalent of war profiteering. The end of second quarter, June 30th, must surely go down as one of the stranger days in financial history. With the US economy in the grip of deepest recession since the Great Depression of 1930s, having experienced an even more rapid contraction than in the 1930s crisis, Wall Street recorded its best quarter for more than 20 years. The S&P 500 finished up by 20%, its best result since the last 3 months. The Dow was up 18%, its largest increase since 1987. The tech-heavy Nasdaq index saw an even bigger surge, rising by 31% for the quarter and 12% since the start of the year. Turnaround come after financial market hits a low in mid-March when they effectively froze, including even for secure government debt. The Fed then intervened, announcing a series of measures to become the backstop for Wall Street and the entire financial system. According to calculations by the political economist Robert Bernard, market capitalization was $21.8 trillion on March 23rd, $28.9 trillion by June 26. In the course of less than 3 months, the actions of the Fed gov in all corners of the financial market, its reduction of interest rate to zero and purchases of debt across the board, including even junk bonds, put $7.1 trillion into the hands of stock investors and speculators. Between March 18 and June 26, the wealth of US billionaires increased by $565 billion, reaching $3.5 trillion in total, an increase of 19%. The owner of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, increases wealth by $34.6 billion, up 19%, while Facebook chief Mark Zuckerberg gained an additional $25 billion. Over the same period, tens of millions of American workers lost their job, and a vast part of generation of students and young workers saw their future educational and employment prospects wiped out. Millions of people now face economic devastation when the very limited government assistance they have received is cut off, scheduled for the end of this month. The testimony on Congress on last week, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell made clear that the flow of money into the financial market would continue. He pointed out a gloomy picture of the US economy. Noting that downturn in the second quarter is likely to come in as the worst on record and warned that the outbreak is extremely uncertain. But he reassured Wall Street that the flow of money, the Fed has expanded its balance sheet by $3 trillion in the past 3 months, would continue, at least at the current price, and more would be provided if deemed necessary. We will closely monitor developments and are prepared to adjust our plans, he said. Figures released over the weekend are revealing how Fed intervention into the corporate bond market, both through exchange traded fund, that is ETF, and direct purchases of corporate bonds backed by money provided by the US Treasury and leveraged tenfold by central bank, is benefiting some of the biggest US corporations. Among the corporate bonds directly purchased are those of Microsoft, Visa and Home Depot. Indirect purchases ETF include bonds issued by Apple and Goldman Sachs. The Fed has laid out $430 million on individual bond purchases. The program is only just beginning and much more is to come. And $6.8 billion on ETF that with exchange traded funds. The purchase of corporate debts in the second bond market does not directly benefit the companies that issue the debt, but rather the bond traders and speculators who purchased it in order to make a capital gain. The major corporations do benefit directly, however, because the Fed purchase mean they can take on debt at a lower interest rate than would otherwise would be the case. But Fed intervention into financial market have many defenders. Above all, those who have benefited most. According to Goldman Sachs, market capital would have gone awry had not the Fed stepped and acted to stabilize the market for corporate debt. In other words, Fed actions were necessary to enable continuation of the speculation and looting that played a major part of creating the conditions for the market crash of 2008 and massive injections of money that enabled these criminal practices to continue thereafter. These actions set up the financial market for potentially an even bigger disaster when the pandemic struck than in 2008. The Bank of International Settlements, in its annual report issued on Monday, said future economic historians might consider the COVID-19 pandemic a defining moment of the 21st century. Many economies had shrunk at an annualized rate of between 25 to 40% in a single quarter, as unemployment rate jumped to double figures in a couple of months. Sydney Morning Herald business columnist Stephen Bartholomeus pointed to the parlous state of much of US economy. Portion of zombie companies in the US listed companies that only survive because ultra low interest rate and continuing access to very cheap debt allows them to cover their interest costs is now estimated to close to 20%, he wrote. This means that the economic crisis triggers by the pandemic, but whose underlying cause lies in the internal deterioration and decay of the capitalist economy, has only begun to unfold, threatening to bring devastating social consequences. The world faces its worst economic recession since the Great Depression of 1930s, with the global stock market tanking, currencies plunging, tens of millions of jobs being lost, and a massive humanitarian crisis unfolding in front of us. The ultra-rich continue to get richer. They have remained untouched by socio-economic disruptions caused by the pandemic. According to Forbes, between March and June, the world's top 21st billionaires accumulated over 600 billion US dollars in wealth. The start of the pandemic, collective of 21st US billionaires' wealth has surged by close to 600 billion USD. End of June, while 6.5 trillion in household wealth has disappeared. That's according to the Institute of Policy Studies and Americas for Tax Fairness analyze report published on Friday, which stated that US billionaires class saw its wealth climb 20% between March 18 and June 17, with 29 new billionaires added to the total. Using Forbes data, the analysis found that total net worth of the 643 US billionaires climbed from 2.9 trillion USD to 3.5 trillion USD. During the same period, 45.5 million Americans filed for unemployment. Total US billionaires' wealth increased by twice as much of the federal government paid out in one-time stimulus check to 150 million Americans. This is the actual figure about the rising billionaires and unemployment status. In the face of pandemic, the US Federal Reserve has done an excellent job of keeping financial market functioning. It has pledged trillions of dollars to ensure that the broad range of institutions, including hedge funds, money market, mutual funds, and securities dealers, can meet their immediate obligations. This has helped consumers and companies to borrow the money they need to stay afloat. Preparing for next crisis will require fixing some fundamental weakness. For one thing, the country should stop subsidizing debt. Time and again, crises have demonstrated that excessive leverage makes economic shocks more damaging. Yet the government still encourages it, for example, by providing tax breaks for interest on mortgage loans and corporate borrowing, by providing an almost unlimited backstop for the short-term debts of financial institutions. Eliminating or constraining such preferences would make the whole economy more resilient. Here, officials must also address some more immediate vulnerabilities. The Fed should encourage banks to pause dividends and accumulate equity and prepare for an emergency round of rigorous stress test. The Treasury should reactive the OFR and FSOC, that is Financial Stability Oversight Council, is to help ensure losses on leveraged loans don't trigger more widespread contagion. Insurers and large hedge funds don't become weaklings and mortgage market keep functioning. By taking all the responsible steps now, policymakers can ensure the coronavirus pandemic doesn't bring about a repeat of another financial crisis in 2020.